He's threatening Greenland and Panama and Canada and Cuba and Mexico. And you sit there the whole time and act like it's okay. Is there anything Trump can do, Michael Knowles, that you would say, I condemn it, and you hop off the Trump train, or are you going to tickle his taint for the rest of your fucking life?
No, there have been plenty of Trump policies that I've criticized because he's only right about 99.78% of the time. So the First Step Act I thought was a misstep. But I would say the rest. Excuse me. I would say the rest of the administration has been very successful. What's your problem? What's
my problem is that you're a cuck and you're a hack and you're not an independent thinker and you're meat riding Trump.
Why do you say
that?
Know
that what he's doing in imperialism and you don't care.
I just answered your question. I corrected
Congratulations. You rented your brain to a war criminal, pedophile, rapist. I hope you're happy.
A war criminal, pedophile, rapist?
Michael Knowles on Piers Morgan Uncensored obliterates this disrespectful liberal during a debate on Venezuela. Knowles masterfully dismantles leftist arguments with facts and logic. Dave Smith and Piers Morgan just watch as Knowles exposes the failures of leftist policy and the real issues with Venezuela.
I understand the argument. I may not agree with all of it, but I do understand the logic to what Trump is doing here. Do you?
No, because we don't have a right to act like this around the world. We're supposed to be a nation among nations, not a nation above nations. And they used to at least lie to us in the past and say that this is good for the world and we're spreading freedom and democracy. Now they don't even bother to lie. Now it's naked, rank, disgusting imperialism where they say, we're going to take the oil, and the point is that we're going to take the oil. We're going to take the minerals. We're going to take the precious metals. We're doing this for our corporations. We're doing it for the Epstein class, the billionaires. And this, to piggyback on what Dave Smith said, is frankly not what many of the MAGA voters thought they were signing up for. They thought America First actually meant America First. By the way, you also replaced the Maduro regime with the Maduro regime. Congratulations on that. It's also been now a week straight of pro-regime protests. Now you have roving gangs of Venezuelan militias that are kidnapping Americans. But again, I come back to the fundamental point, which is if you sign on to stuff like this, you're saying might makes right and the law of the jungle is back. What you're saying is China has a right to go into whatever smaller country they want and depose the leader and say we're doing it because we can and we have the right to do it and we have bigger guns and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So they're never going to address that fundamental question, which is why do we have a right? Do we actually believe in international law, or was that all a joke? Are we rolling the clock back to the 1700s and the 1800s, and we're going super primitive style here? And I think the answer to that is yes. They want to go super primitive style.
The law goes back to antiquity. It's not some creation of modernity, whether we're talking about the 1700s or the 20th century.
The Geneva Conventions, the Nuremberg Tribunal, the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunal?
Yes, those exist, but international laws, the jus gentium goes back to antiquity. However, unfortunately, a lot of our liberal friends think history began a few decades ago.
The League of Nations was useless. It fell apart, and that's why we had the UN. That's why we had the Geneva Convention.
Right, I'm talking about millennia ago,
because we looked
not
at
merely
piles of millions
but it's true.
of
Woodrow
dead
Wilson
bodies,
failed
and
with
we
the League
said
of
that's
Nations.
a bad idea. We looked at piles of millions of dead bodies and said that's a bad idea. Let's not do that anymore. Let's actually have a framework and rules and laws, and Trump is blowing that up. By the way, he bombed fishing boats from Venezuela, Trinidad, and Tobago, and Colombia. He just did the regime change in Venezuela. He bombed Yemen and Somalia and Nigeria and Iran. He's threatening Greenland and Panama and Canada and Cuba and Mexico. And you sit there the whole time and act like it's okay. Is there anything Trump can do, Michael Knowles, that you would say, I condemn it, and you hop off the Trump train, or are you going to tickle his taint for the rest of your fucking life?
No, there have been plenty of Trump policies that I've criticized because he's only right about 99.78% of the time. So the First Step Act I thought was a misstep. But I would say the rest. Excuse me. I would say the rest of the administration has been very successful. What's your problem? What's
my
your
problem
criticism?
is that you're a cuck and you're a hack and you're not an independent thinker and you're meat riding Trump.
Why do you
and
say
you
that?
know that what he's doing in imperialism
answered your
and
question.
you don't care.
I just answered your question, and I corrected
Congratulations. You rented your brain to a war criminal, pedophile, rapist. I hope you're happy.
A war criminal, pedophile, rapist? You brought up a point. You brought up international law, and you made a very false point, a dumb point, which is that international law began only a few hundred years ago. I corrected you, and I pointed out that the international law is part of the Western tradition. Excuse me one second. It goes back to antiquity. It's a principle of the jus gentium. And then you said, well, international law has failed because of the League of Nations failure, which I think is actually undermining your argument and proving my point and proving Trump's point, because the liberal internationalism that was established by people like Woodrow Wilson did, in fact, fail, which is why we need to restore an older and more classical conception of the international order, which is precisely what Trump's doing. So I think you've hoisted yourself with your own petard. And then you just make a lot of vulgar sort of non sequiturs because you don't have a leg to stand on.
All right, let me bring in...
Let me ask you this question. Hold on, Piers.
Let
me ask him a question real quick. Tell me the name of the Minister of Defense in Venezuela.
I don't know. whatever his name
Well,
is.
and that's the
Garcia
problem, is
or
that you're
Rodriguez or
advocating for a
something.
regime change. You don't know the first thing.
I didn't. I
about
just
the
said the
country.
opposite.
You're
I
advocating
argued
for the
against a regime change.
He
Kyle,
actually
you have
said
to get
the
the cotton
opposite.
out of your ears.
I heard Michael
Kyle,
Knowles,
I just want to correct something. You
Michael
said I'm
Knowles
arguing for
say
a regime
the
change.
regime remains there, right? So he said the opposite, in fact. I want to bring in Coleman.
No, but he wanted to take out Maduro. Don't give me that cutesy little
Yes,
BS.
but he
That's
made
not a
the point that the
regime.
regime is still.
You.
He made the point the regime is still there, and the vice president appears to be much more compliant with running Venezuela the way America would prefer for its national security than Maduro.
Kyle Kulinski starts with this idealistic statement. We're supposed to be a nation among nations, not above nations. This sounds beautiful in theory, but it completely ignores the reality of how the world actually works. The international order has always been maintained by dominant powers enforcing stability. History shows us that global stability requires a hegemon willing to enforce order. Kyle Kulinski wants America to pretend we're just another country, but we're not. We're the world's reserve currency holder, the world's largest economy, and the guarantor of global shipping lanes and trade routes. Securing resources is not imperialism when you're dealing with a hostile regime that was literally about to hand those same resources to China and Russia. This guy wearing sunglasses inside is trying to tell us what America First is. In his world, America First means isolation and weakness. The Monroe Doctrine has been American policy for 200 years. Our hemisphere is our sphere of influence. China's sphere is Asia. Russia's sphere is Eastern Europe. Every major power has regional interests they protect. This is not new. This is how the world has always worked. Name Venezuela's defense minister is the most irrelevant question I've ever heard. Desperate attempt to score a cheap point because Michael Knowles had already won the substantive debate. Kyle Kulinski represents everything wrong with the modern left's foreign policy thinking: naive idealism, hatred of American power, and a complete inability to understand how the world actually works. And anyone with a realistic understanding of geopolitics knows that American strength is the foundation of global stability.
If America looks like it's just ignoring international law, if it thinks it can just go into Venezuela, kidnap the president, put him in a courtroom in New York, act with impunity, take Greenland if it wants, etc., etc., what is to stop America's enemies using the exact same argument to do what the hell they like?
I think that first of all, I disagree with the premise, but second of all, I think my ideological friends on this panel seem to be quite mistaken about a basic premise here, which is they seem to believe that the United Nations or something is what keeps our enemies from running roughshod over the world, American interests and other people's. That's not true. You know what stops our enemies? We do. The might of the United States is what stops us. Now, the reason I disagree with your fundamental premise is I don't think that we violated international law in the removal of Maduro. First of all, the Monroe Doctrine, now the Monroe Doctrine, has been the cornerstone of American foreign policy basically since the beginning. But two, there was a legal predicate for the removal of Maduro that goes back to a court order in 2020. And this has really gone back about 25 years now. Let us not forget it was the Biden-Harris administration and Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, who called for the arrest of Maduro and actually offered $25 million to anyone who could advance it. So the only difference between the Republican action here and what the Democrats called for just 1 year ago is that Trump was actually able to do it, and he saved $25 million doing
why
it. So
okay, but by that logic,
the argument.
But
That's
by that,
the argument that Trump got
logic,
Biden's policy done.
Well, by that logic, Michael, why should President Xi not be able to go into Taiwan and take the leader and put him in a Chinese courtroom? By that logic.
Can I address that, Piers?
He's got no answer, Piers.
I'm happy to answer.
Well, let Michael answer.
I can stop interrupting before. Yes. So the only reason that Xi has not gone into Taiwan so far is because the United States has told Xi not to. From the point of international law, there is also another confusion because international law is a real thing. Many of my fellow conservatives want to pretend that there is no such thing as international law and that might merely makes right, but that's not true. Law is an ordinance of reason, so we can actually know something about it and it objectively exists even though it's not material. However, what passes for international law these days, specifically over the last 100 or so years, is a bunch of liberal gobbledygook nonsense, which even my friend here, Kyle Kulinski, points out doesn't work, which is why the League of Nations failed and the UN has largely failed. So there is such a thing as natural law, but it is effected through political powers. And right now, the only thing stopping Xi from going into Taiwan, the only thing that has stopped Vladimir Putin from running roughshod over Ukraine is not some abstract concept in the clouds. It's the might of the United States empire and our allies around the world. And that is what will continue to stop them.
But I don't think Carl, I will bring you in now, but I don't think that it has stopped Putin running roughshod over Ukraine. He just invaded it.
He hasn't taken the country yet.
Well, he invaded it and took as much as he could, but the Ukrainians have put up a much bigger fight than he thought they could. But I don't think Putin's intentions have been remotely thwarted. I don't think America's
Well, he only
done.
invaded because of Biden. So, frankly, had Trump stayed, I don't think he would have even invaded. But it's true. He was able to run some roughshod over it during Joe Biden. But there was no floating international law. Let's not forget, he invaded before the supposedly awful attack on Venezuela.
But he has. I mean, look. Yeah, but the thing is, Michael, Putin has continued to act with total impunity in Ukraine, regardless of anything Donald Trump has said publicly, either in a friendly or unfriendly manner. He doesn't seem to care. I think if Putin could take the whole of Ukraine tomorrow, he'd take it. I think that's always been his ambition.
That's my point, I guess. That's my point. I don't think that America's very successful strike on Venezuela is going to do one thing. Now, it will not change one iota of Putin's calculation.
No, but that's my point. My point to you is that when it comes to Taiwan, I'm not sure that American power is the limiting factor for the calculations by people who run countries like Russia and China that you seem to think it is. Because I think Xi would have looked at Ukraine and thought, well, what's America actually done to stop Putin
Piers,
taking as much as he can?
Do you think that international law is going to limit Chairman Xi?
Well, no, I don't actually. I do think the concept of international law has been twisted and torn apart so badly that I'm actually uncertain what it really means anymore. Because people don't seem to... I mean, if you look at what Israel's done in Gaza, I would say they've trampled over international law with utter impunity, and they don't care.
Here's what Piers Morgan doesn't understand or refuses to acknowledge. Nothing has ever stopped major powers except other major powers. International law is a piece of paper. What stops invasions is power. Military power, economic power, and the willingness to use it. The only thing that has ever constrained aggressive powers is the credible threat of force from other powers. Michael Knowles understands this. Piers Morgan, apparently, does not. Putin already invaded Ukraine before Venezuela. He didn't need America's permission or example. He did it because he calculated that Joe Biden was weak and wouldn't respond effectively. He was right. So the question isn't whether American action in Venezuela gives permission to our enemies. Our enemies don't need permission. They act based on their own calculations of power. The real question is, does American strength deter our enemies, or does American weakness invite aggression? There was a legal predicate for action against Maduro going back to 2020, and it was the Biden administration that offered $25 million for Maduro's capture. The Biden-Harris administration and Secretary of State Tony Blinken called for Maduro's arrest and put a $25 million bounty on his head. Democrats wanted this. They just couldn't do it. The only difference between what Trump did and what Democrats wanted is that Trump actually succeeded.